Welcome to This Explainer. If you've ever caught yourself wondering where exactly your thoughts come from, or, how you developed the ability to get super excited about history, math, or even a very specific type of dog like a Labradoodle, well, you're in the right place. Today, we're diving straight into the awe-inspiring chronological journey of how your mind actually physically constructs itself. So let's start with a really massive number, 86 billion. Right now, literally as you're listening to this, you have about 86 billion brain cells, or neurons, inside your head. That is the foundational building block of everything you are. And every single one of those neurons, it has a highly specific job to do in the grand architecture of your mind. You see, these neurons live in very specific regions. For example, some clusters are entirely dedicated to helping you see the world, while way over in another section, different neurons are firing off just to help you move your arms and legs. But here's the thing, they don't work alone. They connect with each other across different areas to form this incredibly complex, crazy network. And it's this exact network that controls literally all of your thoughts, your feelings, and your actions. But that brings us to a huge question. Where do all these neurons even come from to begin with? That brings us to section 1, smaller than a dime. Okay, so let's step back to the very beginning. Your brain actually starts forming when your entire body is incredibly tiny. I'm talking smaller than a dime. And during this early pregnancy phase, the sheer speed of growth is just staggering. Your body is pumping out 250,000 new neurons every single minute. Just take a second to process that. Every 60 seconds, 250,000 new brain cells spring into existence. The manufacturing speed is absolutely wild. And that brilliantly illustrates our overall timeline here. That microscopic early pregnancy phase really kicks things off. But out of the roughly 40 weeks it takes for a baby to grow, the absolute peak production phase happens right in the middle, between 10 and 20 weeks. So by the time a fetus hits that 20-week mark, the primary building blocks of the brain are mostly manufactured, getting everything prepped for those final functional leaps in the last 8 weeks. Which leads us to section 2, the Great Neuron Migration. Because once they're formed, these newly minted neurons don't just stay put. No, they start a massive, highly coordinated migration to the specific regions where they're going to live for the rest of your life. It happens in 3 steps. Step 1, each neuron starts as a cell body, carrying a special internal destination code, telling it exactly where to go. Step 2 is the actual travel through the developing brain. And then step 3, they finally reach that assigned home and start making connections. It's basically a highly choreographed biological dance. But traveling alone isn't easy, right? To pull off this massive migration, your neurons rely on something called glial cells. Think of these basically as the glue. As your neurons travel across the developing brain, these glial cells hold them together. And this vital process isn't just a transport system. It's what actually gives your brain its physical structure and shape as everything locks into place. Moving right along to section 3, waking up in the womb. Once these billions of cells finally reach their destinations using those special codes we talked about, the real magic of brain development kicks in. They start talking to each other. They do this across a synapse, which is just the tiny space between neurons that lets them communicate. As these synapses form and start bridging the gaps in the network, the fetus actually starts showing you this is happening. They show distinct periods of activity and rest, like taking a nap or even yawning in there. And this neural development hits the gas pedal as we get closer to birth. In just the last 8 weeks of pregnancy, the brain's network connects enough for a fetus to be able to hear, smell, respond to touch, and respond to light. And incredibly, this blows my mind, they are actually learning before they even enter the outside world. Now, scientists actually proved this prenatal learning is a real thing using a famous children's book. In one really fascinating study, women were asked to read The Cat in the Hat out loud during the last 6 weeks of their pregnancy. So day after day, the babies in the womb are just listening to the rhythm and the sound of that specific story. Well, the results were absolutely astounding. After they were born, researchers gave these babies special pacifiers that controlled audio recordings, and the babies quickly figured out that if they deliberately changed the way they sucked on the pacifier, they could trigger the sound of their mother reading The Cat in the Hat. They literally adapted their behavior to hear it, proving they recognized the exact familiar story they had learned while still in the womb. No way, right? And that brings us to section 4, a trillion new connections. The big takeaway here is that babies' brains are just profoundly adaptable, and this adaptability completely explodes after birth. During those first few years of life, a young baby's brain is forming a staggering 700 brand new connections between neurons every single second. Yes, every second. All the sights, sounds, and interactions from their environment are being aggressively wired right into that complex network. And because of that ridiculous 700 per second pace, the math scales up super fast. By the time a child turns just 3 years old, their brain has formed 1,000 trillion connections. 1,000 trillion! The foundational network for how they will perceive and interact with the entire world is being laid down at absolute lightning speed. Now, all of this early, hyper-connected activity leads to a major physical result. As you can see, by the time you hit age 6, your brain is already at 90% of its total adult size. The vast majority of the physical growth is totally done. It really doesn't grow much more in terms of physical volume after you turn 6. Which leaves us with this really fascinating comparison to kind of summarize our journey in this explainer today. Before birth, most of your actual physical brain cells, the neurons themselves, are already there. But after birth, the story totally shifts. The actual development, the continuous creation of all those new connections extends all the way through late adolescence. And honestly, you continue developing new connections throughout the rest of your life based on what you learn and experience. Think of it this way. The physical hardware of your mind was built and migrated into place before you even took your very first breath. But the software, the synapses, the living network, well, that is entirely up to you. So here's a final thought to leave you with today. Most of your brain was built before you were born, but how will you rewire your connections today? Keep learning, keep building those networks, and I'll catch you next time.